All right, in this video, we're going to create a server, a web server from our local machine. And the idea here is that usually when when a browser, we go to a new page, we link to a new page, what's happening is a browser is sending a request to a web server somewhere on the internet, and the web server receives the request, does whatever it needs to do, and sends back the response. In other words, if I click on about.html, that request is sent to the server gets that file, and as a response sends that file back to the browser. So this is a way for us to see it on the other end of things. So we're going to create a server that ideally handles those requests. So the first thing to do is I'm going to create a file called index.js, and I'm going to use this file to write JavaScript to initiate or to create a server that's going to run on my local machine. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to use the word require, and we've seen this already, but require is simply saying I need to utilize a module or pre-written code that's available for me to use. And in this case, we're going to use the HTTP module or library, whatever term you're comfortable with. But in Node.js world, we use the word modules. So I've created an HTTP variable which is holding an HTTP object. You could name this whatever you wanted to. I just gave it a name for clarity. So I now have an HTTP object. And now that I have an object created, I can utilize its methods. And a method that I'm going to utilize is the create server method. And then if you look at the documentation, you can see that it is expecting to receive a function. So let me just finish off there we go. And so it's receiving we're going to send an anonymous function actually, that I'm going to have a request and a response. All right, so let's clean up our little skeleton setup here. The idea here then is we're sending an anonymous function. That function is, the first parameter is the incoming message or the request, and the second parameter is the outgoing message or the response. In other words, here's the request that was received from the browser, and here's what we're sending back to the browser. So we're going to see a lot more examples of this, but to keep it simple in the short run, what I'm going to do is simply send the obligatory hello world text to the browser, which will then get displayed in the browser. The next part of this particular when I create the server, I'm also going to use the method listen to tell the local machine what port to listen on. I'm going to use 3000 for this example, and we'll see that work in just a minute. I think also I'm going to console log something just so I know that things are working. Server is running. Okay, let's just run it and see how this works. So remember, I can do control backtick in order to get to my terminal window here, or you can do view and integrated terminal. Here is my control backtick keyboard shortcut, so if you want to do that way, you can. So now to run this file, I'm going to utilize the word node and index.js. And what you should see, notice that I haven't been returned to my prompt, that the server is in fact running, and my input is halted. I can't do anything because the server is running. And let's just pull over a browser window and send a request to our local server to see if it sends back a response. In other words, our local server, if you're running a server on the same machine you've got a browser on, your URL, or not your URL, your IP address is always 127.0.01. And then we also said that we're listening on port 3000. So if we utilize this and I hit the enter key, I'm sending a request to my server, which should then send back a response. And in fact, it did. So now I've got a two-way communication going. I've got a server that's running, and I've got a browser that sent a request. That request was received. Nothing was really done with it, but then we sent back a response. So let's do this. I'm going to continue on with this thought process, And what we're going to do is we're going to send what's called a header, which is very common. Let's see, let me just start writing it out. So we're going to send a response. So notice I'm doing it before the end method. The end method says, I'm all done sending you information. And so before I'm all done sending information, I want to create a header to send back. So I'm going to use response, and I'm going to utilize the write head method. And what we're going to do is send, first we need to send a response code. So I'm going to send the response code 200, which says everything was fine. I received your request, and I'm happy with, I can find the file that you need, or there's been no errors. So we're going to send back a AOK 200 response method, or response code. And then we're going to send an object, is the second parameter here, or argument. And we're going to say, one of the common responses is content type. And we're going to tell the browser what type of information it's going to be receiving. In other words, it's receiving text from us, and at the moment it's just plain text. In a moment, in another video shortly hereafter, we're going to send HTML text, but right now we're just sending plain text, so that the browser has some kind of information about what it's receiving. So let's go ahead and send this now. Now, anytime we make a change to the server, which is what we just did here, we've made a change to the server object. In order to utilize that change, we're going to have to stop the current running server. I'm going to Control C, which will stop that. And then I have to start the new server with its new whatever we've put into it with the new changes. And this was called index.js. So I'm going to start the server again. And this time, what I'd like to share is I'm currently using Firefox, but you can do this in Chrome also. So if I hit reload, nothing has changed as the output. But what I'm going to start to share with you is if I right-click on it and choose Inspect Element, which we've done many times before, this time if I look on Network, and I look in the network, it says I have to reload in order to see information. Okay, I'll reload it. And now what you'll start to see is there is our status 200. The method was get. That's the default method, as opposed to post, which we've seen when we've created forms. So the default method, if none was specified otherwise, we use the get method. There's the domain, and there is our plain text information. So this is what we sent over in the header. And in fact, if we double click on this, we'll see the header information, the actual header information that the browser receives. And you can see this on any web page, so I encourage you to start looking at it. There's our request URL, the method, the remote address, the status code, and here we can see more detail of the response headers. So a little bit of information about the browser. That was what was sent. Here's the request header. So this is what the browser sent to the server. And then the response header is what was returned back from the server. So when the request was sent out, this is the information that can be captured in this REQ. That's the request from the browser. And this is some of the request information that was sent from the browser. So okay, so let's see, is there anything else I want to add on this video? I think that's good for this video. We've seen how to get a server started. We've seen that a server can receive a request from the browser and it can send the response back. And if we're curious about that information, we can look in this network tab and see what the browser sent as a request and what was received back as a response. So now we're getting started on server side JavaScript, because I have to finish that sentence. Server side JavaScript.